Declan O'Malley didn't pay $50 for a conversation. He paid for a sturdy back and a pair of hands to help him survive the Montana winter. But when the stagecoach dust settled in Iron Ridge, he didn't get the farm girl he ordered. He got a ghost. She was trembling, silent, and looked like a stiff breeze would snap her in two. He almost sent her back. He should have sent her back, because the woman shivering in his wagon wasn't just a shy bride. She was a walking vault of secrets, and what she would reveal on their first night in the cabin wouldn't just change his mind. It would tear his hardened soul apart and rebuild it before the sun rose over the peaks. The wind howling down from the Bitterroot Mountains carried the scent of snow and pine, cutting through the heavy woolen coats of the few souls brave enough to stand on the platform at Iron Ridge. It was late November, 1887. The Montana Territory was unforgiving, a place where weakness was buried 6 feet deep before the ground froze solid. Declan O'Malley stood apart from the small cluster of townsfolk. He was a mountain of a man, standing 6'4" in boots that had seen more miles of rocky terrain than most men saw in a lifetime. A jagged white scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, disappearing into a thick, dark beard that did little to hide the grim set of his mouth. He wore a coat made of bear fur, the hide cured by his own hands, and a revolver rested on his hip, not for show, but for necessity. The locals gave him a wide berth. To them, Declan was the Bear of the Ridge, a recluse who controlled the timber rights to half the valley but refused to live in civilization. He came down once a month for supplies, and today he was here for a different kind of delivery. "Stage is late, Declan," the station master, an old man named Gideon, called out, his voice cracking against the wind. Gideon was the only man in town who dared to speak to Declan without looking at his boots. "Snow in the pass," Declan grunted, his voice deep and gravelly, like stones grinding together. He checked his pocket watch, a gold piece that looked out of place in his calloused, scarred hand. He wasn't nervous. Declan didn't do nervous, but he felt a distinct tightening in his gut. 2 months ago, tired of the solitude gnawing at his sanity and needing help with the curing and smoking for the winter, he had placed an advertisement in a Boston paper. "Wanted, wife. Must be of sturdy constitution, accustomed to hard labor and isolation. No romantics, providing safety and shelter in exchange for work and loyalty." He expected a widow from the factories, or perhaps a farmer's daughter looking to escape the city slums. He needed someone who could skin a buck, chop kindling, and endure months of silence without losing her mind. The shrill whistle of the steam engine echoed off the canyon walls. The ground trembled as the heavy iron beast chugged around the bend, spewing black smoke into the grey sky. The brakes screeched, sparks flying as the train ground to a halt. Declan stepped forward, his eyes scanning the windows. Doors opened, and passengers spilled out. Miners, a few businessmen looking lost, and a family heading west to Oregon. Then, the conductor stepped down, holding a hand out to assist the final passenger. Declan's breath hitched, turning into a cloud of white vapor. She was tiny. That was the first thing he noticed. She stepped onto the wooden platform with the hesitation of a deer entering a clearing. She wore a grey travel dress that was frayed at the hem, and a thin shawl that was woefully inadequate for the biting Montana cold. A bonnet obscured her face, but he could see her hands clutching a battered leather valise. They were small, pale hands, not the hands of a worker. "Mr. O'Malley," the conductor shouted, waving a piece of paper. "I have a delivery for a Mr. Declan O'Malley. A Miss Lydia." He squinted at the paper. "Lydia Hartwell." Declan marched forward, the wooden planks groaning under his weight. The crowd parted instantly. He stopped in front of the woman. She barely reached his chest. "You're Lydia?" he asked, his tone rougher than he intended. The woman slowly looked up. Her face was pale, her skin like porcelain that had been kept in the dark too long. Her eyes were large, the color of stormy seas, and filled with a terror so raw it made Declan flinch inwardly. She didn't speak. She just nodded, a single, jerky motion. Declan looked at her, then at the conductor. "There's been a mistake. I ordered a wife who could work. This one looks like she'll freeze before we hit the timberline." The conductor shrugged, handing Declan a small envelope. "Ticket was paid for. Papers are signed. She's your problem now, O'Malley. She hasn't said a word since Chicago. Mute, I reckon. Or simple." Declan looked back at her. "Are you mute, girl?" Lydia's lips parted, trembling, but no sound came out. She gripped her valise tighter, her knuckles turning white. She looked down at her feet. Declan swore under his breath. He needed a partner, a helper. Instead, they had sent him a bird with a broken wing. He looked at the darkening sky. The storm was coming. He couldn't send her back now. The next train wasn't for 3 days, and the station had no inn for women. If he left her here, she'd be prey for the drunks and drifters within an hour. "Fine," Declan growled. He snatched the valise from her hand. It was surprisingly heavy, and turned toward his wagon. "Follow me. Keep up, I don't wait." He didn't offer her his arm. He strode toward the hitching post, where his team of draft horses waited. He tossed her bag into the back and climbed up onto the bench seat. He looked down. Lydia was standing by the wheel, looking up at the high seat, unsure of how to climb up in her restricted dress. With a huff of annoyance, Declan reached down. He grabbed her by the waist. She felt fragile, nothing but ribs and layers of cheap fabric, and hoisted her up onto the seat beside him, as if she weighed no more than a sack of flour. For a second, his large hand lingered on her side. He felt her flinch, a violent shudder that vibrated through her body. He pulled his hand away as if burned. "Wrap this around you," he ordered, pulling a heavy buffalo robe from behind the seat and tossing it over her lap. "It's a 4-hour ride. If you die of cold, I'm not digging a grave in frozen ground." Lydia pulled the fur up to her chin, her eyes wide, staring straight ahead. Declan snapped the reins. "Higher!" The wagon lurched forward, leaving the town of Iron Ridge behind. As they climbed toward the dark tree line, Declan felt a heavy pit in his stomach. He had brought a stranger into his sanctuary, a woman who looked like she was running from the devil himself. He didn't know then that the devil was indeed following her, and that she had brought the storm with her. The road to Declan's cabin wasn't really a road. It was a scar cut into the side of the mountain, winding upward through dense forests of Douglas fir and ponderosa pine. The air grew thinner and colder with every mile. For the first hour, the only sounds were the rhythmic clatter of the horse hooves on stone, the creak of the wagon wheels, and the wind howling through the canyons. Declan was used to silence. He craved it. But this silence, the silence radiating from the woman beside him, felt heavy. It was a loud silence. He glanced at her from the corner of his eye. She sat rigid, her back not touching the wooden seat. Her gaze was fixed on the drop-off to her right, where the canyon plummeted 500 feet down into the rushing river below. Most greenhorns screamed or begged him to slow down on these turns. Lydia didn't make a sound. She just stared into the abyss as if she were considering jumping. "You have a name other than what's on the paper?" Declan asked suddenly, his voice startling the horses slightly. Lydia turned her head slowly. She shook her head. "Lydia, then," he grunted. "I'm Declan. Up here, titles don't mean much. The bears don't care if you're a miss or a madam." He waited for a reaction. A smile, a frown, anything. She just blinked, those grey eyes assessing him with a strange mixture of fear and calculation. "You ever worked a day in your life, Lydia?" he pressed, feeling the need to break the tension. "Chopped wood? Skinned a rabbit?" She looked at her hands, hidden under the buffalo robe, and shook her head again. Declan sighed, a puff of white steam. "Then why did you come? The ad said hard labor." Lydia turned to him. For the first time, she made a deliberate movement. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. She handed it to him. Declan kept one hand on the reins and unfolded the paper with the other. The handwriting was elegant, looping script, educated writing. "I have nowhere else to go." I learn fast. I eat little. Please." Declan stared at the note. The please at the end was underlined twice, the ink slightly smudged, as if a tear had fallen on it. He crumpled the paper and shoved it into his pocket. "We'll see," was all he said. By the time they reached the plateau where his cabin stood, the sun had dipped behind the peaks, casting the world in a bruised, purple twilight. The cabin was a sturdy structure made of massive logs, built to withstand avalanches and grizzly attacks. A barn stood nearby, and the smell of wood smoke hung in the air from the fire he had banked before leaving that morning. "Home," Declan announced flatly. He halted the horses and jumped down. He didn't wait for her to struggle this time. He reached up and lifted her down. Her body was stiff, frozen from the hours of sitting. When her feet touched the snow, her knees buckled. Declan caught her against his chest. For a brief moment, they were pressed together. He smelled not the cheap perfume of the saloon girls in town, but something faint and clean, like lavender soap and fear. She looked up at him, her face inches from his beard. He saw a bruise, faint and yellowing, high on her cheekbone, previously hidden by the bonnet's shadow. His eyes narrowed. "Who hit you?" Lydia pulled away sharply, nearly slipping on the ice. She gathered her skirts and backed away, shaking her head vigorously, her eyes pleading with him to drop it. Declan held his hands up, palms open. "All right, I don't pry. But nobody hits a woman on my land. You're safe here, Lydia. Long as you pull your weight." He pointed to the door. "Go inside, warm up. I got to tend to the horses." He watched her scramble toward the cabin, her small boots crunching in the snow. She struggled with the heavy oak door, using her shoulder to shove it open, before disappearing into the darkness of the cabin. Declan stayed outside longer than necessary, brushing down the horses and checking their hooves. His mind was racing. She was educated, she was abused, and she was terrified. This was a disaster. He was a man who lived by simple rules: work hard, stay alone, survive. She was a complication. When he finally entered the cabin, stamping the snow off his boots, he found she hadn't just warmed up. She had found the kerosene lamp and lit it. She had found the kindling box and stoked the fire in the massive stone hearth until it roared. And she was standing in the center of the room, the buffalo robe folded neatly on the bench, looking at the mounted head of a cougar on the wall. The cabin was one large room, with a sleeping loft above accessed by a ladder. There was a large wooden table, a few chairs, and a bed in the corner of the main floor, his bed. Declan hung his coat on a peg. The cabin suddenly felt very small with her in it. "There's stew in the pot over the fire," he said, moving to the kitchen area. "Venison. It's been simmering since yesterday." He grabbed 2 tin bowls and ladled the thick, dark stew. He slammed one down on the table and pointed to a chair. "Sit. Eat." Lydia sat. She didn't eat immediately. She bowed her head, her lips moving silently. A prayer. Declan watched her, feeling a strange irritation. "God, don't look this high up, girl. Just eat." She ignored him, finished her prayer, and took a small spoonful. She ate with a delicacy that was entirely out of place in a mountain cabin. "The arrangement," Declan said, his voice filling the room. "You take the bed in the corner. I sleep in the loft. I don't expect marital duties. Not unless you want them, and you look like you'd rather jump off a cliff." Lydia stopped eating. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for the lie. Men always wanted something, but Declan just looked tired. "You cook, you clean, you mend the clothes. I hunt, I handle the timber, I protect the property. That's the deal." Lydia nodded slowly. "Tomorrow," Declan continued, "I'll show you how to shoot a rifle. If I'm out on the trap line, you need to know how to kill a wolf. Or a man." At the mention of killing a man, Lydia's spoon clattered against the tin bowl. Her hand spasmed. "You got someone looking for you, Lydia?" Declan asked, his voice low and dangerous. She froze. Then, very slowly, she shook her head. But her eyes betrayed her. They darted to the window, black as pitch, as if she expected a face to appear in the glass. Lies don't survive winter either, Declan muttered. He stood up, towering over the table. "I'm going to check the perimeter. Storm's getting worse. Lock the door behind me." He grabbed his rifle and went back out into the night. Lydia waited until the latch clicked. She rushed to the window, watching his dark silhouette disappear into the swirling snow. Once she was sure he was gone, she slumped against the heavy door, her legs giving out. She pulled up the sleeve of her dress. Her arm was a map of purple and black bruises. She touched the side of her ribs, wincing. She wasn't Lydia Hartwell. That was a name she found on a gravestone in a passing town. She was Eliza Vance, wife of the most powerful and sadistic judge in Chicago. And she hadn't just run away. She had stolen the ledger that proved he was taking bribes from the railroad companies. She wasn't mute. She just knew that her voice was distinct, cultured, and would give her away instantly. She looked at the rough interior of the cabin. Declan O'Malley was a terrifying man, a giant with scars and a gun. But he had given her the bed. He had offered her food. He hadn't touched her. She stood up, determination hardening her delicate features. She would work. She would hide. And she would pray that the snow buried her tracks deep enough that the judge's marshals couldn't find her. But as the wind shrieked outside, rattling the heavy timbers of the cabin, she didn't know that the ledger in her valise wasn't the most dangerous thing she had brought with her. The true danger was the storm itself, and the secret skill she possessed, a skill women weren't supposed to have. That would be the only thing standing between Declan and death before the sun rose. The wind didn't just blow, it screamed. It slammed against the north side of the cabin like a physical blow, making the heavy timbers groan in protest. Inside, the fire hissed and popped, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. Declan sat in the heavy armchair near the hearth, whittling a piece of pine. He was trying to ignore the woman. Lydia, or whatever her true name was, had finished cleaning the kitchen area with a thoroughness that bordered on obsessive. Now she sat on the edge of the bed in the corner, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the flames. She was so still she could have been a statue. The silence was suffocating. Declan was used to the quiet of the mountains, but this was different. This was a silence filled with unspoken words and terrified breathing. "Storm's settling in," Declan said, his voice startlingly loud in the small room. He didn't look up from his whittling. "Drifts will be 5 feet by morning. Don't think about running. You'd freeze before you made the tree line." Lydia didn't respond. She just pulled the woolen blanket tighter around her shoulders. Declan stood up, frustration gnawing at him. He walked to the window, scraping the frost off the inside of the glass with a fingernail to peer out. Pitch black. But something caught his eye, a shadow moving near the barn, darker than the night. The horses. They were kicking their stalls. He could feel the vibration through the floorboards. "Damn it," he muttered. He grabbed his coat and the Winchester rifle from the rack. "Stay here. Bolt the door behind me. Don't open it unless you hear my voice." Lydia looked up, alarm widening her eyes. She stood up as if to stop him, but he was already out the door, swallowed by the swirling, white void. Declan fought his way to the barn, the snow stinging his face like needles. The barn door was slightly ajar. He cursed. He had latched it. The wind must have been stronger than he thought, or something had pried it open. He stepped inside, raising the lantern he had grabbed from the porch. The horses were in a frenzy, eyes rolling white. "Easy, Bess, easy," he soothed, stepping into the aisle. A low growl vibrated from the hayloft above. Declan froze. It wasn't a wolf. Wolves didn't climb lofts. It was a mountain lion, a cougar pushed down from the high peaks by the storm, starving and desperate. Before Declan could raise his rifle, the golden blur descended. It hit him with the force of a falling boulder. The lantern shattered, plunging the barn into darkness, save for the moonlight filtering through the cracks. Declan hit the ground hard, the air driven from his lungs. Claws raked across his heavy bear-hide coat, shredding it like paper. Declan roared, a primal sound, and jammed the butt of his rifle upward. He connected with bone, and the cat screeched. But the beast was on him again, instantly. teeth seeking the soft flesh of his throat. Declan threw his left arm up to block the bite. Crunch! The teeth sank into his forearm, grinding against the radius. Pain, white-hot and blinding, shot through his body. But Declan O'Malley was a survivor. With his right hand free, he drew the hunting knife from his belt and drove it blindly into the animal's side. Once, twice, 3 times. The cougar convulsed, its grip loosening. Declan shoved the heavy carcass off him and scrambled backward, gasping for air. He was alive. But as he tried to stand, his leg gave way. He looked down. The cat's hind claws had found their mark during the struggle. His right thigh was laid open, a deep, jagged gash that was pumping bright red blood onto the straw. The femoral artery wasn't severed, but it was close. Too close. Hell, he whispered, his vision swimming. He dragged himself out of the barn, leaving a trail of crimson in the pristine snow. The trek back to the cabin, 50 yards, felt like 50 miles. The cold was already seeping into his open wounds, stealing his heat. He reached the cabin door and pounded on it with a bloody fist. "Lydia!" he roared, his voice weak. "Open the door!" The bolt slid back instantly. The door swung open. Lydia stood there, the warmth of the fire framing her silhouette. She saw him, covered in snow, his coat in ribbons, blood soaking his leg and dripping from his arm. Most women would have screamed. Most women would have fainted. Lydia didn't make a sound. She grabbed him by the front of his shredded coat and heaved, pulling him over the threshold with a strength he didn't know she possessed. She kicked the door shut and latched it. Declan collapsed onto the bare rug in front of the fire. The room was spinning. He looked up at the ceiling beams, feeling the cold grip of shock tightening around his chest. "Whiskey," he mumbled, pointing vaguely toward the cupboard. "Need. Cauterize." He expected her to run for the bottle. He expected her to panic. Instead, Lydia fell to her knees beside him. Her hands, previously trembling and shy, were suddenly steady. She ripped the fabric of his pant leg, exposing the gnarled, bleeding mess of muscle. She didn't get the whiskey. She ran to the kitchen, grabbed a clean linen towel, and pressed it directly into the wound, leaning her entire body weight onto his leg to stop the bleeding. Declan grunted in agony, trying to push her away. "Get off! Hurts!" Then it happened. The secret that would shatter him. "Stop moving, you stubborn fool," a voice said. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't the voice of a shy, mute girl. It was a commanding, clear, alto voice, the voice of someone used to being obeyed. Declan blinked, trying to focus on her face. "You speak?" "I said stop moving," she ordered, her tone clipping the air like a whip. "You've nicked a branch of the femoral artery. If you thrash, you'll bleed out in 3 minutes. Do you want to die, Mr. O'Malley?" Declan was too stunned to answer. The mute mouse was gone. In her place was a woman with eyes like steel. "I need your sewing kit," she demanded, not looking at his face, her eyes fixed on the blood welling around her fingers. "Needle. Silk thread if you have it, cotton if you don't, and the whiskey. Now tell me where they are." "Top. Shelf," Declan rasped. "Tin box." Lydia. No, this stranger kept pressure with one hand, reaching for the poker in the fire with the other, to drag the heavy kettle of boiling water closer. "Hold this," she commanded, taking his bloody hand and forcing it onto the towel on his leg. "Press down. Hard. If you let up, you die." Declan obeyed. He watched in a daze as she moved. She didn't scurry. She moved with efficient, practiced speed. She retrieved the kit, threaded a needle, and poured whiskey over the instrument, then over her hands. She came back to him, her face set in a grim line. "This is going to hurt more than the cougar," she said flatly. "Don't scream. You'll startle the horses outside." She poured the alcohol directly into the raw gash on his thigh. Declan arched his back, a guttural roar tearing from his throat, his vision going white. "Breathe," she instructed, her voice cutting through the pain. She knelt over his leg. "I have to stitch the muscle fascia first, then the skin. Stay with me, Declan." She called him Declan. Not Mr. O'Malley. As the needle pierced his flesh, Declan watched her. He watched the way her hands moved, precise, confident, looping the thread with a dexterity that no seamstress possessed. These were surgeon's knots. "Who are you?" he wheezed, the pain making him delirious. She didn't look up. She tied off a suture and started another. "I'm the woman saving your life. Now hush." Declan's head fell back against the rug. The firelight flickered. The shy bride he had bought for $50 was stitching him back together like a battlefield surgeon. The realization hit him harder than the blood loss. He hadn't brought a victim into his home. He had brought a savior. And then the darkness took him. The night was a blur of heat and shadows. Declan floated in and out of consciousness, trapped in the grip of a fever brought on by the cat's dirty claws. He dreamed of the war. He dreamed of the shrapnel that had given him his scar. But in the dream, the field medic wasn't the old drunk sergeant who had saved him in '64. It was her, the woman with the grey eyes. He felt a cool cloth on his forehead. He felt a cup pressed to his lips, the bitter taste of willow bark tea and laudanum. "Drink," the voice commanded softly. He drank. "Please," he mumbled in his delirium, grabbing her wrist. "Don't let them take the ridge." "No one is taking the ridge, Declan," she soothed. Her hand brushed his hair back from his clammy forehead. Her touch wasn't fearful anymore. It was possessive. He woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment, Declan didn't know where he was. He tried to sit up, and a sharp, pulling pain in his thigh reminded him of the night. He groaned, falling back onto the pillows. Pillows? He was in his bed. The bed he had given her. He was stripped to his long johns, his leg bandaged neatly with strips of white linen. His arm was also bandaged. The cabin was bright with morning light reflecting off the snow outside. The storm had broken. Lydia was standing by the stove. She was wearing one of his flannel shirts over her dress, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes. But she was moving with that same efficient energy he had seen the night before. She heard him stir and turned. "You're awake," she said. Her voice was calm, but the command was gone, replaced by a guarded caution. She was waiting to see if the monster had returned. Declan cleared his throat. It felt like he had swallowed sand. "Water." She brought him a tin cup. He drank greedily. When he finished, he lowered the cup and looked at her. Really looked at her. "You're not mute," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," she replied, taking the cup back. "And you're not a farm girl." He gestured to his leg. "I've seen doctors do worse work than that. Where did you learn to stitch a man up?" Lydia hesitated. She walked to the table and sat down, keeping a safe distance. "My father was Dr. Silas Vans. He was a surgeon in the Union Army, then a country doctor in Ohio. I was his only child. He wanted a son. He got me. So he trained me as if I were a son." Declan slowly propped himself up on his elbows, ignoring the pain. "A female doctor." "An unlicensed assistant," she corrected bitterly. "I can set a bone, deliver a breech baby, and stitch a jagged wound. But to the world, I'm just a woman who should be knitting." "So why the act?" Declan asked, his eyes narrowing. "Why the silence? Why the fear?" Lydia looked at her hands. "Because intelligent women are dangerous, Declan, and because my husband, my late husband, didn't like it when I corrected him." Declan went still. "Husband? The paper said you were single." "The paper was a lie. I'm a widow, or I will be, if the law doesn't catch me first." She looked up, and her eyes were fierce. "I didn't kill him, but I hurt him. I hurt him bad enough to get away." Declan processed this. He looked at the scar on his own face, then at the bruises fading on hers. "Who was he?" "Judge Archibald Thorne." She whispered the name like a curse. "A powerful man in Chicago. He bought me from my father's estate when he died to pay off debts. He wanted a trophy. He got a woman who knew how to identify poison and how to use a scalpel." She stood up and walked toward the bed, stopping a few feet away. "I stole his ledger, Declan. He takes bribes from the railroad to steal land from farmers. I have the proof. That's why I'm here. That's why I pretended to be mute. A mute woman is invisible. A mute woman can't testify." Declan looked at her. This small, fragile-looking creature who had taken on a mountain lion's victim and saved his life, all while running from a powerful, corrupt judge. He should be angry. He should be furious that she had brought this danger to his door. The judge wouldn't just send a sheriff, he'd send mercenaries. But as he looked at the precise stitching on his leg, all he felt was a begrudging, overwhelming respect. And something else. A heat in his chest that had nothing to do with the fever. "You saved my life," Declan grunted. "You provided the shelter," she countered. "We're even on the shelter," he said roughly. "But the stitching, that's worth more." He swung his legs over the side of the bed, wincing. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed, stepping forward to stop him. "You'll rip the sutures." "I need to check the horses," he growled. "I checked them," she snapped, pushing him back down by the shoulders. Her hands were small but strong. "Bess is fine. The mare has a scratch. I cleaned it. I dragged the cat carcass out to the ravine so the scent wouldn't spook them." "Now lay down." Declan stared at her. She had dragged a 200-pound cougar. "You dragged it?" "I used a rope and the pulley system from the hayloft. I know physics, Declan. I don't need muscles." Declan let out a short, incredulous laugh. It sounded rusty. He fell back against the pillows. "Lydia," he said, testing the name. "Eliza," she corrected softly. "My name is Eliza." "Eliza," he repeated. The name suited her. It was sharp and elegant. "Well, Eliza, seems I didn't buy a shy bride. I bought a partner." Eliza's expression softened, the fear melting away to reveal a glimmer of hope. "Does that mean you won't send me back?" Declan looked at the Winchester leaning against the wall, then back at her. "Send you back?" He shook his head slowly. "Judge Thorne wants you. He's going to have to come up this mountain and take you, and I just sharpened my knife." For the first time since she arrived, Eliza smiled. It was a small, tentative thing, but it transformed her face, making her breathtakingly beautiful in the morning light. But the peace was fragile. Down in the valley, in the town of Iron Ridge, a telegraph machine was clicking, a message from Chicago. A bounty had been posted, and the man reading the telegram wasn't a lawman. He was a tracker named Cole, the Wolf Sterling, a man who had never lost a trail. Declan O'Malley thought he had survived the storm, but the real storm was just beginning. 3 weeks passed. The snow piled high against the cabin walls, turning the world into a white, silent fortress. Inside, a different kind of quiet had settled, a companionable, warm silence that Declan had never known in his 40 years of life. His leg was healing, thanks to Eliza's relentless care. She changed the dressings twice a day, boiling the linen strips and checking the sutures with a critical eye. She forced him to rest, wielding her authority as a doctor with a firmness that amused him as much as it annoyed him. In those long winter evenings, the cabin transformed. It wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was a home. Eliza cooked with the meager supplies they had, turning dried beans and venison jerky into savory meals. She mended his clothes, her needle flashing in the firelight. Declan found himself watching her constantly. He watched the way a loose strand of honey-colored hair would fall across her face when she read one of his few books. He watched the way her brow furrowed when she was deep in thought. The shy bride was gone. In her place was a woman of intellect and steel, hiding in the mountains. They talked. For hours. She told him about the suffocating parlors of Chicago, the hypocrisy of the high society that ignored the rotting slums just blocks away. He told her about the war, about the smell of black powder and the friends he had buried in the mud of Virginia. But the ledger sat in the bottom of her valise, like a ticking bomb. "They'll come," Eliza said one evening, staring into the fire. "Judge Thorne doesn't leave loose ends. That ledger could hang him." Declan was sharpening his hunting knife, the rhythmic shk-shk sound filling the room. Let 'em come. The pass is blocked. No horse can make it through the drifts. Men like Thorn don't need horses, she whispered. They have money, and money buys determination. She was right. 2 days later, the silence of the mountain was broken, not by wind, but by the crack of a rifle. It happened at dawn. Declan was hobbling toward the woodpile on his crutch, a sturdy branch he had fashioned. A bullet splintered the log inches from his hand, sending wood chips flying into his face. Declan dropped the crutch and rolled into the snow, ignoring the screaming pain in his healing thigh. "Get down!" he roared toward the cabin. Eliza was already moving. She didn't scream. She slammed the heavy shutters closed and dropped the iron bar across the door. Declan crawled through the snow, dragging himself behind the stone foundation of the cabin. Another shot rang out, kicking up snow near his boot. The shooter was high up, positioned on the ridge overlooking the clearing. A sniper! Declan! Eliza's voice came from inside, near the gap in the shutters. "Where are they?" "Ridge line," Declan shouted back. "East side, 300 yards. I'm pinned." He had his revolver, but at that range it was useless. His rifle was inside the cabin. "Stay down," Eliza commanded. Declan heard movement inside. Then he saw the barrel of his Winchester slide through the gun port, cut into the heavy logs. Crack! The rifle spoke. High on the ridge, a puff of snow erupted near a cluster of rocks. Crack! A second shot, rapidly following the first. A man screamed in the distance. Declan stared at the cabin wall in disbelief. She wasn't just a surgeon. She was a marksman. "Covering fire!" she yelled. "Move, Declan!" He didn't waste the chance. He scrambled through the snow, lungs burning, and threw himself through the back door as Eliza unbarred it for a split second. He collapsed onto the floor, gasping. Eliza was already back at the window, working the lever of the Winchester. Her face was pale, but her hands were steady. "Did you hit him?" Declan asked, pulling himself up. "I winged him," she said tightly. "Windage is tricky up here. But he's down." "There won't be just one," Declan growled, grabbing his spare shotgun from the rack. "Who is it?" "Cole," Eliza said, the name tasting like ash. "The tracker. The locals call him the Wolf. Thorn uses him for wet work. He doesn't arrest people, Declan. He erases them." As if on cue, a voice echoed from the tree line, amplified by a megaphone. "Mrs. Thorn." The voice was smooth, mocking. "Or is it Mrs. O'Malley now? Hard to keep track of your bedmates." Eliza flinched, her grip on the rifle tightening until her knuckles turned white. "Send out the ledger, Eliza," Cole yelled. "And the man lives. You come with me, we go back to Chicago, and the judge might be lenient. He misses his nurse." Declan moved to the window beside her, peering through the crack. He counted 4 shadows moving in the trees. They were spreading out, flanking the cabin. "He's lying," Declan muttered. "He'll kill us both the second he has that book." "I know," Eliza said. She looked at Declan, her grey eyes filled with a sudden, fierce emotion. "I brought this on you. I should have kept going to Oregon." Declan reached out, covering her hand on the rifle stock with his large, calloused one. "You're my wife, Eliza. Paper or not, this is your home, and nobody takes what's mine." He looked at the layout of the attackers. They were professional. They were moving from cover to cover, closing the distance. They would burn them out. "We can't hold the cabin," Declan assessed grimly. "They'll toss dynamite or torches on the roof within the hour. The logs are dry." "The root cellar?" Eliza suggested. "Trap." Declan shook his head. "We need to get to the high caves. There's a narrow trail behind the barn, leads up the cliff face. It's suicide in this snow, but it's our only chance." "Your leg," Eliza protested. "We'll have to hold," Declan grunted. He grabbed a satchel and started stuffing it with ammunition, dried meat, and a flask of whiskey. "Grab the medical kit. And the ledger. If we die, that book dies with us." Outside, the first torch arced through the air, landing on the porch. The dry wood caught instantly. "Time to go," Declan said. He kicked open the back door, the side facing the sheer cliff wall, away from the shooters. The smoke was already curling under the eaves. They ran. The climb was a nightmare. The trail was barely a foot wide, a goat path etched into the granite face of the mountain. To their left was the solid rock wall. To their right, a 1,000-foot drop into the white abyss. Declan led, his breathing ragged. Every step sent a jolt of agony through his right leg. The stitches were holding, but the muscle was screaming. He leaned heavily on the rock wall, leaving bloody handprints on the stone. Eliza followed close behind, carrying the heavy Winchester and the satchel. She didn't complain. She didn't stumble. She kept her eyes on Declan's back, her mind racing. Below them, the cabin was fully engulfed. The flames roared like a beacon, sending a column of black smoke into the clear blue sky. They could see the small figures of Cole and his men swarming the yard, frustrated. "They see us!" Eliza shouted over the wind. A bullet pinged off the rock face, inches above Declan's head, spraying him with stone dust. "Keep moving!" Declan yelled. "Around the bend!" They scrambled around a jagged outcropping, momentarily out of the line of sight. But Cole wouldn't stop. He would follow. And he was uninjured. They reached the cave entrance, a shallow recess in the rock, protected from the wind, but offering no exit. It was a dead end. Declan collapsed against the wall, sliding down to a sitting position. He checked his revolver. 3 rounds. The shotgun was empty. Eliza had the rifle, but only a handful of shells remained. "We're trapped," Declan wheezed. I thought this went through to the upper pass. Rockfall must have blocked it." Eliza looked at the blocked tunnel at the back of the cave, then at the narrow ledge they had just traversed. They were cornered. Cole and his 3 men would be coming around that bend in minutes. "Give me the whiskey," Eliza said suddenly. Declan looked at her. "Now's not the time for a drink, darling." "Give it to me," she ordered, her surgeon's voice back. He handed her the flask. She didn't drink. She ripped a strip of fabric from her petticoat. She took the remaining gunpowder canister from Declan's bag. Black powder he used for reloading shells. "What are you doing?" "Physics," she muttered. "And chemistry. My father didn't just teach me anatomy. He taught me how to compound medicines. And explosives." She poured the gunpowder into the half-full whiskey flask. She stuffed the fabric into the neck. "It's a crude bomb," she explained, her hands moving with frantic precision. "Black powder for the blast, alcohol to spread the fire, if I time it right. You throw that, you might bring the whole mountain down on us," Declan warned, looking at the heavy accumulation of snow hanging on the ledges above them. Eliza looked up at the cornice of snow, tons of white death poised to fall. Then she looked at the ledge where the men would appear. "Not on us," she said, a cold calculation in her eyes. "On them." She moved to the edge of the cave, hidden by the rock wall. "Get back, Declan. Cover your head." Footsteps crunched on the stone. Voices. "Nowhere to run, Mrs. Thorne." Cole's voice drifted around the bend. He was close. 20 feet. "Come out and we can make this civilized." Eliza lit the rag. The flame sputtered in the wind, then caught. She didn't throw it at the men. She threw it upward. She hurled the flask with all her strength, aiming not for the trail, but for the heavy overhanging cornice of snow directly above the bend. The flask tumbled through the air, end over end. It struck the rock face just below the snowpack and exploded. Boom! The sound was deafening in the canyon. It wasn't a huge explosion, but the shockwave was enough. A deep, groaning crack echoed through the mountains. It sounded like the earth itself was splitting. "What the—" Cole's voice was cut off. The white shelf above gave way. It started as a hiss, then a roar. Thousands of tons of snow, ice, and rock cascaded down the cliff face. It swept over the narrow trail where the men were standing like the hand of God. There were no screams, just the thunderous roar of the white wave wiping the ledge clean. The cave shook violently. Declan threw his body over Eliza, shielding her as snow and debris blasted into the entrance. The world went white and loud, a chaotic swirl of noise and pressure. Then, silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Declan slowly lifted his head. He brushed the snow off his shoulders and looked toward the entrance. The ledge leading to the cave was gone, buried under 20 feet of snow. The trail back was erased, but the attackers were gone too, swept down into the abyss. "You did it," Declan whispered, coughing in the dust. "You crazy woman, you actually did it." Eliza pushed herself up, her face covered in soot and snow. She looked at the devastation she had caused. She was trembling, the adrenaline crashing. "Are they gone?" Declan said. "Nobody survives a ride like that." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. She buried her face in his chest, sobbing, not from fear, but from the sheer release of the terror she had carried for months. "It's over," Declan murmured into her hair. "The wolf is dead." But as the dust settled, Declan saw something that made his blood run cold. Across the ravine, on the opposite ridge, too far to jump, but close enough to see, a figure stood up from behind a boulder. He had been flanking them from the other side. It was Cole. He hadn't been on the ledge. He had sent his men ahead as bait. Cole raised his rifle. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked like a demon, his coat flapping in the wind. "He's not dead," Declan said, his voice hard. Eliza looked up. Cole yelled across the chasm, "You missed one, Doctor, and now you're trapped in a hole with no way down." He raised his rifle, aiming not at them. He was too far for a clean shot with the wind, but at the snowpack above the cave. "Checkmate!" Cole screamed. He fired. The bullet struck the rock above the cave entrance. A second, larger avalanche began to shift. This one wasn't going to sweep past them. It was going to seal them in. "Back!" Declan roared, shoving Eliza toward the blocked tunnel at the rear of the cave. "Get back!" The mountain came down. The entrance to the cave went black as a wall of snow and rock slammed shut, sealing them in total darkness. The darkness was absolute, a physical weight pressing against their eyes. The roar of the avalanche had been replaced by a silence so profound, Declan could hear the blood rushing in his ears. "Eliza," his voice croaked. "I'm here." A cold hand found his face. "Are you hurt?" "Alive." Declan tried to move, shoving aside loose shale with a grunt, ignoring the agony in his stitched thigh. He struck a match against the rock. The flare of sulfur hissed, casting a flickering yellow glow. The cave had become a tomb, the entrance sealed by a wall of compacted snow and granite. The air was already growing stale. "We have an hour of air," Declan assessed grimly. "Maybe less." Eliza didn't panic. She took the match, holding it high. "Look." The thin trail of smoke didn't pool at the ceiling. It drifted lazily toward the back of the cave, toward the blocked tunnel Declan had dismissed as a dead end. "Draft," she whispered. "Air is moving. That blockage isn't solid. Dig." They worked in the dark, tearing at the loose scree until their fingers bled. Declan leveraged the massive slabs while Eliza cleared the debris, a desperate battle against exhaustion. Finally, Declan's pry bar shifted a massive stone, and a rush of cold, fresh air hit their faces. They squeezed through the jagged opening into a natural chimney, angling sharply upward to a circle of grey light. The ascent was torture. The rock was slick with ice, and Declan had to drag his injured leg, pulling his dead weight with his arms. Eliza climbed above, guiding him. "Right hand, 2 o'clock," she would whisper. They moved as a single organism, his strength, her vision. When they finally pulled themselves over the lip of the vent, they collapsed onto the snow, high on the mountain's spine. The sun was setting, casting blood-red shadows across the peaks. Below them, on the far side of the ravine, a solitary figure moved. Cole. He hadn't left. He stood on a flat rock, scanning the avalanche debris with binoculars, hunting for the ledger. Declan lay in the snow, chest heaving. He pulled his revolver. 1 bullet left. "He's too far," he whispered. 70 yards. With a pistol in this wind, I can't make that shot." Eliza looked at the predator below, then reached into the satchel. She pulled out the leather-bound book that had cost them everything. "He doesn't want us," she said, her voice eerily calm. "He wants this." Before Declan could stop her, she stepped out onto the exposed ridge, the wind whipping her torn dress. She held the ledger high. "Cole!" she screamed. The figure below froze, then turned, He saw the silhouette against the dying sun. He saw the prize. "You want it?" she yelled. "Come and get it." Cole didn't hesitate. Greed overrode caution. He began to scramble up the slope toward them, rifle in hand. "You're drawing him in," Declan realized, his grip on the revolver tightening. "I'm bringing him into range," she corrected. She stood like a statue, the bait in the trap. Cole crested the ridge 20 yards away, panting, his eyes fixed on the book. He smiled, a cruel, predatory expression. "Smart girl," he sneered, leveling his rifle at her chest. "Now put it down. Slowly." Eliza's hand didn't tremble. "You think you've won? But you forgot one thing." "And what's that?" Cole laughed, stepping closer. 10 yards. "I'm not alone." Cole's eyes flicked to the side, but it was too late. Declan rose from the snow behind a boulder, the revolver extended in a two-handed grip. The pain, the cold, the fear, it all vanished, distilled into the front sight of his gun and the center of Cole's chest. "Judgment Day," Declan whispered. Bang! The shot cracked through the thin mountain air. Cole staggered, looking down at his chest in surprise, where a dark bloom spread rapidly. He looked back at Eliza, mouth opening to speak, but no sound came out. He crumpled backward, sliding down the slope before going still. The Wolf of Chicago was dead. Eliza lowered the ledger and sank into the snow. Declan crawled to her, wrapping his arms around her, burying his face in her neck. They stayed there as the first stars appeared, shivering, battered, but alive. Spring came late to Iron Ridge. When the snow melted, it revealed the charred remains of the cabin. The townsfolk assumed the recluse and his bride had perished. But in May, a federal marshal arrived. He wasn't looking for a runaway wife. He was hunting Judge Archibald Thorne. The ledger had arrived in Washington, destroying the judge's empire overnight. High on the mountain, the sound of hammers echoed. Declan O'Malley was rebuilding. The new cabin was bigger, with a room for a surgery. Beside him, wearing work trousers, Eliza O'Malley, no longer hiding, no longer silent, was planing a log. She paused, wiping sweat from her brow, and looked at Declan. He stopped hammering. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The scar on his face crinkled as he smiled, a genuine warmth that reached his eyes. They had survived the winter, the wolf, and their own secrets. In the silence of the mountains, they had found a love forged in fire, unbreakable, wild and free. Declan thought he was buying a servant, but fate sent him a warrior. Their story reminds us that true strength isn't just about muscles or guns. It's about the courage to stand beside someone when the whole world is against you. Eliza and Declan's love wasn't a fairy tale. It was a war they won together. They proved that even the deepest secrets can be forgiven, and the broken can be made whole again if they find the right hands to hold them. What did you think of Eliza's transformation? Would you have been brave enough to light that fuse? If you enjoyed this dramatic Wild West romance, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to share this story with a friend who loves a good twist, and subscribe for more epic tales of love, betrayal, and survival. Thanks for watching.